low-risk solutions provide the best value to both the government and aircraft operators. Whatever your mission, be it maintaining a fleet, providing life cycle upgrades.
Distinguished guests and attendees, please take your seats. This year's Tinker and the Primes will begin in just a moment.
Field Aerospace will be your wingman.
Welcome to this year's Tinker and the Primes. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage your MC today, Senator Brenda Stanley.
Wow. Good morning and welcome back. Yesterday's sessions were impactful and got us off to a terrific start. We'd like to thank the Jamaica Bearings Group for a wonderfully hosted reception. Also, I'd like to recognize some dignitaries we have with us here today. If you will stand when I call your name. Mona Taylor from U.S. Senator Langford's office. Caleb Cochran from U.S. Senator Mullen's office. And Scott Chance from Congressman Cole's office. I am Senator Brenda Stanley, I represent Senate District 42, which includes Tinker Air Force Base. We are strong advocates for our military and aerospace companies in Oklahoma. A few of our recent accomplishments include exempting 100% disabled veterans from the fee to obtain a real ID, providing a sales tax exemption on sales to women's veterans groups, providing the surviving spouse the disabled veteran sales tax exemption from whose spouse died in the line of action, providing an extra $1,000 to the maximum allowable credit in the Caring for Caregivers Act if the family member that's being cared for is a veteran. We ensured that a veteran's surviving spouse receives the disabled veteran sales tax exemption if the veteran dies before receiving the disability determination. We exempted all military retirement benefits from state income tax. That's our biggie. The state of Oklahoma has passed several pieces of legislation to support the aviation and aerospace industry, including the engineer tax credits for aerospace, eliminating sales tax on MRO transactions, creation of an aerospace industry support program called ACES. Oklahoma's colleges and universities expect more than 18,000 projected aerospace-related degree completions between 2022 and 2026. Oklahoma is home to one of only 12 licensed U.S. spaceports, the only one in unrestricted airspace. The facility features a launch corridor with a northwest polar trajectory and contains 6 commercial aircraft hangars and a 13,503 by 300-foot primary runway. The Mike Monroney Aeronautical Center, located in Oklahoma City, provides critical products and services that touch all aspects of aviation. The center directly supports the safe and efficient operations of the national and international aviation system and trains 76,000 students annually. We could not be more proud that the aerospace industry is Oklahoma's fastest growing and second largest industry in the state, with an economic impact of over $44 billion. Thank you to all of the companies who have their offices here in Oklahoma. Some quick housekeeping notes before we get started. Thank you, Spirit Aerospace Systems and Pratt Whitney, for sponsoring the breakfast this morning. Please remember to use the conference app to submit questions for speakers today. We'll have a packed house, so please be courteous and move to the inside seats and to the tables in the front to allow for more guests. Remember to take all your belongings with you when you exit the ballroom. Today, we begin with Oklahoma's longest tenured congressman, senior member of the House Appropriations Subcommittee on Defense, and champion for strong national defense. Please welcome to the stage Congressman Tom Cole.
Let's be real. No congressman should walk up to the Star-Spangled Banner. For God's sake, that's a little overwhelming. First of all, I want to just, number one, thank all of you for being here. Appreciate very much always the turnout at this event. It's always a wonderful, wonderful time when the community and the military and obviously Tinker and Midwest City in particular bond together and set out their common goals and build the friendships and relationships that has made this so successful for the United States Air Force and for the state of Oklahoma for literally decades. So it's a privilege to participate. And I know today you're going to hear from some great speakers, or some you've already heard from. Obviously, Secretary Kendall will be here shortly. Our own General Hawkins, what a great guy. Governor Stitt. I understand you heard from Senator Langford via video yesterday. And of course, Mr. Mayor, it's always good, Mayor Dukes, to be in your town. So got some great folks lined up for you. I'm here to talk to you a little bit about what's going on in Washington, D.C. with respect to funding in general for the military and Tinker in particular. And let's talk a little bit about Tinker quickly and just the extraordinary work that's underway there right now. This is a really critical time, I think, for the American military in a whole variety of ways. And a lot of critical tasks are being undertaken at Tinker. There's obviously the F-35 or F-135, whichever phrase you want to use, engine, and the great work that Pratt Whitney is doing on that. Wonderful 845,000 square foot new facility south of the base. We've got our preparation underway for what we assume will be the eventual maintenance work required by the B-21 when that comes online. We're working very hard right now in Washington. We actually got an extra $200 million on this project in the House Defense Bill to move from the E-3 to the new E-7. God bless Boeing for doing that. And long overdue, and we need to make that happen a lot faster if we possibly can. I know the people at Boeing are certainly doing their part. We need to give them the funding to push that forward. Trying to upgrade the E6, the TACAMO wing as well. And then obviously we have a whole range of workforce issues. I don't think even most Oklahomans understand the complexity of the workforce requirements at a place like Tinker Air Force Base. And I particularly want to single out President Harris. You'd be surprised if I didn't mention General Kirkland, your most distinguished ally, great guy, for the work they've done, and President Webb for the work she's doing at Rose State to try and make sure that we have the type of personnel and training that Tinker requires to fulfill its extraordinarily important function. Now, having talked to you about the wonderful things about Tinker, I'm going to move from the sublime to the ridiculous and talk to you about the appropriations process in Washington, D.C. On that, I actually have some good news. You know, on the defense front, the National Defense Authorization Act has already passed both the House and the Senate. It's across the floor, so we're ready to move toward a conference negotiation. I would expect that to happen sometime in the fall. That bill will get done and across the line for the 63rd straight year. But I'm an appropriator. I always look at authorizing bills as nothing more than pipe dreams until somebody writes the check. And that's going to be the really interesting challenge as we go forward for the rest of the year. On the good news side, both the House and the Senate have passed out of committee, that is out of their respective appropriations committees, the different versions of the Defense Appropriations Funding Bill. And the good news on that is both of them have substantial increases above last year. We're coming off 2 pretty good years where we came in first $25 and then $45 billion above the president's number. And I'm not being critical of the president, but more is better, particularly in a dangerous world. Right now, strangely enough, the House bill is at the president's number, which would be another $28 billion overall. And the Senate number is higher. And I suspect that, sometime when we get to the point where we're negotiating, there'll be a give and take, and that arrangement will settle somewhere between the 2 numbers. But it'll be a pretty good increase. And on things that, again, this isn't specific to Tinker, but I think it's important. One of the superior virtues of the House version of this is, number one, we're going to have the largest pay increase for the American military in 20 years, which is a good thing. Yeah. Number two, in the House version, the raise is really skewed toward the lower ranks, toward E1s to E4s in particular. And that's done, obviously, those folks have been, particularly in an inflationary period, under a lot of pressure. We're trying to deal with that, both and to help us in terms of retention, honestly, and to help us in terms of recruitment, but also just quality of life for young men and women that are willing to put their lives on the line to defend the United States of America. They deserve a better deal than we've been giving them, and we're going to try and make sure in this bill they get that better deal. I'd be remiss not to mention we have a naval aviator in Congress, a guy named Mike Garcia. He was a naval carrier pilot, been an enormous advantage, and this was really his doing. He got the language into the Defense Authorization Bill and to the Defense Appropriations Bill, and so he's the big pusher on this. He's done a lot of quality of life things like being able, for our military spouses as they move to be able to take their credentials and not have to reapply if they're a realtor or some other profession that requires some sort of licensing. Things to try and make life easier for families that are sacrificing a great deal for the United States of America. In the House bill and the House process, I would expect that we will probably look at the Defense Authorization Act in the month of September. And the Senate is moving all its bills. I'm going to drag you inside the appropriations process deeper than you want to go, but the Senate in the previous 2 years did not move a single appropriations bill, including defense, out of committee, let alone across the floor. Now they've moved all 12 of their bills out of committee, including defense, and I expect them to move most of them across the floor in relatively short order because they're cooperating. Now they're spending well above the agreed upon line in the debt ceiling deal, and that's going to be something we're going to have to deal with one way or the other. The House is a little more difficult. It's very narrow majority right now. There's not bipartisan agreement. So 10 of the 12 bills, including defense, are out of committee. The other 2, honestly, will be out in early September. One of them, veterans and military construction, are across the floor. We'll see how many others get. We will arrive at 2 important dates in the months ahead. The first one is September 30th, when we're supposed to have our work done. Now, if you know anything about Washington, D.C., their deadlines are like alarm clocks. So nothing is going to happen by September 30th in terms of actually passing the legislation across the floor. But what will happen is the 2 sides will probably pass a so-called CR, continuing resolution, keep things, I don't anticipate a government shutdown. You'll hear a lot of stuff in the press about that, but I don't believe that will happen. And they will extend for short periods of time so the two appropriations committees, the House and the Senate, can continue to negotiate. And then the next important date will be January 1st. In the past, that didn't mean a lot. This year in the debt ceiling bill, and the House and the Senate agreed to this, we put in something that's going to be an interesting experiment. I hope it's going to be a good one. We'll see, look back on January 2nd, decide whether it was. If we don't get our work done by January 1st, then there's a year-long continuing resolution. Now, that keeps you from shutting down the government, but for the American military, that means you'd lose, at the minimum, the $28 billion increase that's in the House bill. You would get a 1% cut, so it's really $37 billion. And I would tell you it's probably more in the range of 50, because we're not going to be at the House number if we have a successful negotiation. We'll be higher than the House number, lower than the Senate number. That's pretty catastrophic in my view, and no appropriator wants that to happen. And what would be lost was not just the money, but think again of the pay raise I just talked about for the American military, thinking in particular of the lower ranks that would be put at risk by this. So I think the pressure is really going to be on Congress, not just in this area, but in a whole variety of areas. But I'd just, to be candid with you, you know, we live in an era of high partisan polarization, and coming to deals with a Republican House, a Democratic Senate, a Democratic President is going to be an extraordinarily difficult political exercise. And doing it in a period where the credit of the country just got downgraded by Fitch because we're not controlling our long-term spending is going to complicate things. A lot of people are going to look at, we just need to cut. The problem with that is the real issues aren't in the appropriations bills. Now, if you're really serious about balancing the budget, you better have a plan for Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, because those three programs are 60% of all spending at the federal level. Throw in interest on the debt, that's another 10, so you're up to 70. Defense is only about half of what's left, about 15% of the total budget. That's a lot different than it used to be. My dad was a career Air Force guy. When he retired in 1960, defense was 50% of the federal budget, 9% of the GDP. We were at the height of the Cold War. Now, about 3% of the GDP, about 15% of all spending. And I will tell you, that is, I would tell you, very low and too low in my view right now. I want to finish with just a couple of observations beyond Tinker and beyond the appropriations process. I've had the opportunity in recent years, and certainly in recent weeks actually, to do quite a bit of traveling. I was with Ken Calvert and a group of members. Ken Calvert is the chairman of the Defense Appropriations Committee. First in the Far East, about a month ago, we went to Japan, Taiwan, South Korea. We spent a lot of time with our forces on Okinawa, both the Air Force and the Marines in particular. Then just got back last week from going to Germany, where I watched, we met with EUCOM and AFRICOM leaders and talked about the situation in their respective spheres of command, went out and watched Ukrainians training with Americans on Abrams tanks, being instructed in artillery. Had the same privilege earlier this summer to, or spring really, go watch the Ukrainians train down at Fort Sill that were on the Patriot batteries. Every American ought to have the opportunity to do something like that. When I was visiting with the Ukrainians at Fort Sill, before I went on to the base to actually talk to the Ukrainians, we got a brief from a lieutenant colonel who was there teaching them how to use Paladins. He said, "Congressman, before you go talk to these guys, understand this: they're coming from combat and they're going back to combat, and they're doing it in their own country, which is incredible. And you're not going to meet a soldier out here that hasn't lost somebody, a friend, family member, fellow soldier. Matter of fact, the commander of this unit in the last 11 months has lost his father, his mother, and his wife. So if you don't think these people train with a purpose, they do. And we're living in a very dangerous world right now. I mean, 250,000 Russian casualties in a year, 250,000. Probably about 60% of that, amount for the Ukraine. 150,000. We haven't seen war on a scale like this in Europe since 1945. So we live in a very dangerous world. And I will tell you, as an old British historian, this sure looks a lot like the 1930s to me some days. We have a great European power trying to relitigate by force the borders of Europe that have been established. And we have a great Pacific power that's watching and calculating off that and making its decisions about what it might do in the Western Pacific based on the outcome. This is not a time for the country not to be able to pass an NDAA and not to be able to get a defense authorization bill. This is not a time to shortchange the American military. So I just want to tell, number one, just to end with this. The stakes in politics are really high for the country right now in the sense that we need to figure out ways to come together and get things done as opposed to point fingers. And nobody in that process is going to get everything they want. The approach process never works that way. It has to be bipartisan. If only in the Senate you have to get past the filibuster. 60 votes, you can't do that with Republicans alone. You can't do that with Democrats alone. Got to find common ground. And the same thing will work that way in the House at the end of the day. Those of you that wear the uniform of the United States or have worn the uniform of the United States have every right to demand that members of Congress make the political sacrifices that you did personally for your family and that you risked when you wore that uniform. So I would just urge you to do that. I'm not too worried about our Oklahoma delegation. They'll get to the right place the right way, and we'll be fine. I am worried that we'll allow things that should not get in the way of defending the country derail and push us into a continuing resolution. You got my commitment. I'll do everything I can to make sure that does not happen. So thank you for being here. Thank you for the important work you do. Contractors, civilian employees, military alike, we have the best example of why the United States is the greatest country and the greatest military power on the face of the earth right across the street. And you guys make it work every day. So it's a privilege for me to get to be with you. Good luck. God bless.
please welcome back to the stage today's MC, Senator Brenda Stanley.
You all, could we give another round of applause for the incredible Congressman Tom Cole and the great work he's doing in our nation's capital? It's with great pleasure I introduce our next speaker, a graduate of the U.S. Military Academy at West Point, serving 11 years active duty with over 50 years of experience in engineering, management, defense acquisition, and national security affairs across private industry, government, and the military. Please rise for the entrance of our keynote speaker, the 26th Secretary of the Air Force, the Honorable Frank Kendall III.
Please be seated. Good morning. I was told on the way in that Midwest City was the most patriotic city in Oklahoma. Well, my question is, why are you stopping with Oklahoma? If you're the most patriotic city in Oklahoma, I think you got a good shot at being the most patriotic city in the country. It's great to be with you. I got a chance to hear a good deal of Congressman Cole's remarks, and it was a great civics lesson, and I won't have to repeat his summary of where we are in terms of getting our funding and our authorizations through the Congress. But that is something we're all focused on in Washington right now to try to make sure that happens. I want to thank General Hawkins. I want to thank Steve Gray for the opportunity to be here and speak with you this morning. I'm told that I'm supposed to talk for 15 minutes. That may be difficult. I'm good at talking for 45 minutes. I can manage 30. I'll try to do 15, but I want to have a chance for some questions and talk about whatever you're interested in. I've been in this position, Secretary of the Air Force, for just over 2 years now. And I came back into government. My wife questioned my sanity a little bit, I think, there. I'm old enough actually to be retired, believe it or not. And I said, I think I'm needed. I think I can provide some value. And one of the reasons, maybe one of the principal reasons, is that I spent 20 years as a Cold Warrior. And you heard from Congressman Cole about the concerns about Russia and Europe, and you heard about China and the Pacific. I'm focused on China. And if I were to give a one less than a minute speech, maybe, it would be China, China, China. What are your questions? Senator Tester from Montana asked me, we were at breakfast together shortly after I came into office, what my priorities were, and that was my answer, China, China, China. And the reason for that is when I came back into government after being out for about 15 years, way back in 2010, and started looking at the intelligence about what China was doing to modernize its military, it was quite obvious that they had a very, very clear intent. They intend to dissuade the United States from intervening in the Western Pacific, and if we do, they intend to defeat us. And 12, 13 years later, they're much further down that road. They have the budget, the resources, the strategic intent, and basically a unified effort to field the kinds of capabilities that come after what they perceive as the United States' vulnerabilities. We project power thousands of miles away. We've been doing that since World War II. We do it very well. In the first Gulf War in 1991, we demonstrated an unprecedented degree of conventional warfare capability. Dramatic change over what people expected at the time even and what people had not seen before. Stealth, integrated communications and networked forces, wide area surveillance systems like AWACS, for example. The ability to deliver precision munitions. All of these combined to take an assault at scale that was expected to result in something like 10 or 20,000 casualties for the U.S. that had less than 200 or 300. And it was a dramatic demonstration of capability. But what the Chinese studied was how we get that power projection capability into the theater and what we depend upon to make it effective. And they started coming after those potential vulnerabilities. Forward airfields, we have a handful of those both in the Pacific and in Europe. Satellites we depend upon for communications and sensing, handful of those. Aircraft carriers, which we only have a handful of in the inventory and only a few at any time can go to sea. So if you can go after those targets plus command and control nodes and logistics nodes, places like Tinker, but forward, then you have come after some core dependencies of our ability to project power. So when I came back in 2 years ago, I set out to attack that problem. The threat had continued to grow worse, where this time I was out of government for only 4 years. And we set up a list of what we called operational imperatives. And they're just that. They're things we have to do to be successful operationally when we project power. And the way I characterize our situation, and I still do, is that the U.S. is the dominant military power on the planet. You just heard that from the Congressman. It's true. But that starts to change when you get within about 1,000 miles of China. And the closer you get, the more it changes. And China's trying to increase that number. They're continuously extending the range at which they want to threaten their potential adversaries. And their ambitions go even beyond that. China has global ambitions. It sees itself as the replacement, as a leader of the world, basically, a role the United States has had ever since World War II. So what we set out to do was address the change in the threat. China had fielded a lot of long-range weapons, counter space weapons to go after our satellites, long-range missiles to go after our forward bases, smart missiles to go after our carriers, et cetera. And they had also invested heavily in means to try to counter our air-to-air capabilities by extending the range of their air-to-air weapons, adopting stealth, and some other things. So we had a number of operational problems we had to go address. We called the list of 7 that we came up with operational imperatives, which I think, again, is accurate. And we set about, for the next several months, analyzing each of those problems we had, those challenges we had, and coming up with what we need to do to solve them. That led to a large number of initiatives that we put in the FY24 budget. You just heard the Congressman talk about that budget. It hasn't passed yet. We finished our work on the operational imperatives over a year ago. And then we put them into the Air Force's budget, submitted it, he gave you the congressional side, I'm giving you the DOD side, submitted it to the Secretary of Defense's office for review. We went through a several-month review process, got it into the President's budget, and sent it up, just a few months ago to the Hill. So we're now over a year since we finished the work to define what we wanted and identified the resources. And we're waiting for the Congress to pass the bills that will allow us to move forward. We've got about 30 new initiatives in the FY24 budget. Some of them I'll talk about in a second. There is a fear, and I think he's right, Congressman Cole's right, that the Authorization Act will probably pass. It has never not passed. There's a very strong bipartisan support in the Senate side for their bill that came out, less so because of a bunch of riders that were put on the House side. But I think at the end of the day, all the committee chairmen involved and the minority leaders on both sides and their members want to pass this bill, and they will find a way to get it passed. I'm reasonably comfortable about authorizations. I'm more worried about appropriations, and you heard some of the negative consequences. I'm worried as much about the money as I am about the authority to start all the things we need to start. We are in a race for military technological superiority with China, and time is our most precious asset. We cannot afford to waste any more time. Okay, let me talk very quickly about the operational imperatives, because the number 7 I want to talk about particularly with this community. The first one is to get our space order of battle right. We're a nation that essentially had a merchant marine in space and woke up one day and decided it needed a navy. And we've got to completely transform our space military set of capabilities and make them much more operationally focused. We also have to defend against the anti-satellite capabilities of the other side, and we have to protect the joint force from targeting from space by the other side. China's pursued a much more militarized operational space set of capabilities than we have traditionally. There's an enormous amount of work to do there. We've got to get our joint command and control right. There's a rhetoric about something called JADC squared, Joint All-Domain Command and Control. It's been around for a few years. What I found when I came into office was that we really didn't have a unifying effort to pull that together in a practical way and get things fielded. My general guidance on acquisition across the board is I want to get meaningful military capability in the hands of operators as fast as we can. I don't want one experiment and then another experiment or one prototype or two. I want real numbers in the hands of operators so they can use them effectively as quickly as we can. That's one of the areas we're trying to focus on doing exactly that, real capability as quickly as possible. Next on our list is our ability to do moving targets. AWACS is an ancient system now. It was on one the other day that was built in 1972, I think. And then I got onto an E-7, the new aircraft that we're bringing in, is partial replacement for AWACS. We're also going to be looking at space-based capability. All of this is about detecting, tracking, and handing over targetable tracks on moving targets so they can be engaged by anybody in the Joint Force. This is the heart of making JADC² into a real operational capability. And so we're moving down the road of both space-based capabilities there and airborne capabilities like the E-7. Next on the list is air dominance. We're continuing a program that I actually started when I was Undersecretary for Acquisition, Technology, and Logistics called the Next Generation Air Dominance Program, which is going to produce the next generation of tactical aircraft after F-35. That's an F-22 replacement, basically. We've added to that mix now a very robust program to field uncrewed collaborative combat aircraft, UAVs, which are essentially wingmen for a manned crewed aircraft. And the idea is to have more than at least 2, but up to maybe 5, those much less expensive and to a degree expendable resources fight together with the manned aircraft to make it much more effective. And we're well down the road to moving those forward. Everything that I've seen in that regard says that this is the right idea. This is going to work, and it's going to be very cost effective. But again, we've got to get the money, and we've got to get the authorization from the Congress. Next is the resiliency of our bases. Our bases in the Pacific in particular, same is true to a lesser degree in Europe, are not as resilient as they need to be. And our concept called agile combat employment for operating from various bases instead of from one fixed one is the right concept, but we have a lot of things to do to resource that and make it real. Then next on my list is the long-range strike set of capabilities. B-21, which is going to be coming here, and what it will add to our force structure and our global reach is a family of systems, as part of a family of systems. And then finally, and the one I want to spend a minute or two on, is all the things we depend upon to mobilize and sustain a force once it's in the fight. We've made 2 runs at this under the operational imperative guise, and I don't think we've quite got at it yet. And all those 7 that I talked about, plus some other areas, are going to continue to be worked on. We're going to continue to focus on modernization and, in fact, on transformation. But the things we need to do to prepare to actually mobilize and go to war in support of an operations plan in the Pacific or possibly in Europe, we have got to focus hard on and think about every single dependency we have that could be vulnerable to an attack. Cyber attack is obviously one way, but there are a lot of other ways we could be attacked as well. And we've got to think through all of that and make sure that it's as resilient as it needs to be. It's a very cheap kill for the other side to shut down some of our information systems that support logistics or personnel or medical care or whatever, shut those down and deny us the ability to deploy and sustain because of that. So we've got to be more resilient in that regard as well. We've added over the couple of years we've been working on this, some other things to focus on. Munitions, electronic warfare, and mobility. We basically scrapped our mobility plan. We didn't have a replacement plan for the transports. We still don't. That work's still to come. But the tanker plan has been changed dramatically. We need a more resilient tanker. One of the things China has done is reach out to long range and attack at ranges at which we'd like to be able to refuel, which we have to refuel because of the range of our fighters. So we're looking at the next generation of tanker capability, which will probably be a purpose-built aircraft or family of aircraft as opposed to a derivative of a commercial aircraft. So we're going to go in a very different direction of that, all driven by the threat. The thing we have to get used to in general is that we're now living in a world in which we have a true competitor who is challenging us, and that goes back to my comment about my Cold War experience. I spent 20 years worrying about the Soviet Union. They were a significant and real competitor. They were a serious adversary. China is more formidable to me by far than the Soviet Union ever was. They've got better resources. They're more open-minded about applying technology. They've got much better manufacturing capability. And they're being very aggressive and single-minded about pursuing things that are very thoughtful and designed to defeat our ability to project power. So people have said to me, okay, are we done with this operational imperative thing yet? My answer is we will never be done with that, not in our lifetimes probably. It is the new normal, is this continuing effort to modernize in a way which stays ahead of the threat and gains an advantage. People serving in the last 30 years, including almost all my senior leaders, have not lived in a world in which we were challenged like this. If I have told people that if there were one thing I could accomplish as secretary, it would be to impart a sense of urgency to the entire enterprise. If you listen to the things we're saying, and I'm going to close with this and let you ask me some questions. If you listen to the things we're saying, C.Q. Brown talks about accelerate, change, or lose. Chief Master Sergeant of the Air Force Bass uses a phrase that what got us here won't get us there. And I came in with a mantra of one team, one fight. We've got to work this together. We've all got to be forward. We're all talking about the same thing. We're all talking about the fact that we now have a competitor that we've got to take seriously, and we've got to make change, we've got to move forward, and we've got to do so at speed. I put a legislative initiative in this year that would allow us to do new starts without waiting for Congress to approve them. And it came out of the Senate authorization bill. It's not in the House bill. It's one of the things we're going to work in conference. But I'm sitting here a year after we finished the work on the operational imperatives, the initial round of work, and I don't have the authorization or the resources to move forward. This would address that problem. It would not take us beyond earlier stages of a program, preliminary design review, basically. And after that, we'd have to get money and approval from Congress to continue, but it would allow us to start. I've started each of my 8 hearings with the Congress with a quote from Douglas MacArthur. And I guess I am old enough to remember Douglas MacArthur. Yeah, I am. I was born just a few years after the Air Force was. 1949 to be exact. But MacArthur's quote was that all failure in warfare can be summed up in 2 words: too late. We are at risk of being too late. China's been in this race aggressively for a couple of decades now, and I think we're just getting serious about it. And we're going to have to move forward quickly in every way that we possibly can. And if there were one way I could summarize those various slogans, so to speak, of the leadership, we need to get ready for war. And it can happen at any time. General Minahan made a little bit of news when he talked about when he thought that war might happen. Nobody knows when it'll happen. It's not inevitable. It may not happen at all. It's not in China's interest to conduct an act of aggression and get itself into a war with the United States or anyone else. But it can still happen, and it can happen at any time. It'll happen if there is a miscalculation about the will and the capability primarily of the United States, but also of the United States and our allies. We need to demonstrate that we are ready for that fight, and if it comes, that we will win it. The best way to deter is to demonstrate to the enemy that you are ready to fight and that you will win. That's where we need to get to. China's working very, very hard to get different answers to those questions. Okay, I'm going to stop there, and I went way past my 15 minutes, I'm sorry. But I'll take your questions. I think we've got a system down here somewhere figured out how we're going to ask questions, right?
Yep, sir, right over here. We do have a couple microphones, ladies and gentlemen. If you do have questions, please raise your hand, and one of us will come find you and bring a microphone.
I can't see a thing. I got these really bright lights in my eyes here. So if you're waving at me, it's not going to be any good. But if you're waving over there, it's good.
Good morning, sir. Rob Lewin from Northrop Grumman. You mentioned the impact that China's starting to have on the defense. What are your concerns as far as China's partnership or continued work with Russia, and how much that presents a challenge to us as well?
The Chinese and Russian cooperation in general? It's an interesting arrangement. There's an open question, I think, as to whether Vladimir Putin even let Xi Jinping know that he was about to invade Ukraine when he was there shortly before he did it. They've talked about this very close relationship, and they're doing operations together, particularly in the Pacific. Did something recently in the Arctic, air and sea primarily. The senior partner in the relationship is now clearly China. Once upon a time, it would have been the Soviet Union. It's clearly China now. And I think China does not want to be drawn too much into too close a relationship with Russia. China just participated in the talks in, I think, Saudi Arabia over peace in Ukraine. They want to be a global leader, and I don't know that they see tying themselves too tightly to Russia as the right way to achieve that. On the other hand, it's another authoritarian state. It's a state that has an adverse relationship with the United States and its partners. So the enemy of my enemies is my friend, right? It could become closer, driven out of necessity. But I think what we need to do right now is try to maintain. We need to deal with Russia on, particularly with regard to Ukraine, on that front, and do everything we can to support Ukraine and limit Russia's capabilities and ambitions. We are still confronting Russia in places like Syria, for example, and they're influential in Iran. But we also need to try to manage China. I've been asked if it's a direct analogy to the Cold War. It's not. There's some fundamental differences. The biggest one is that China is more intertwined in the global economy than the Soviet Union ever was. The Soviet Union operated almost as a separate economy. China does not have, China needs the rest of the world. They need the markets of the rest of the world. They need the economic investment of the rest of the world. And they know that. So we need to try to manage the relationship with China and try to dissuade them from doing anything that would be a grave miscalculation on their part. But their ambitions are not unlikely to change anytime soon. So it's going to be a difficult relationship to manage. Piece of that equation, just one piece of that equation, is our military capabilities. And that's what I just spent the half an hour talking about. We need to be in a position where we don't get into a war by miscalculation. That's the most likely way I see one happening. China would convince itself that we would back down. They would convince themselves that they might easily defeat us and our allies. We don't want to let them get to that point while we try to manage that relationship and move it forward. There is a huge difference culturally between the Chinese people, the Chinese society, and Western society. And during the Cold War, I realized at the end in particular that there was a cultural mismatch or difference between the Russians and the Americans that as an American participant in a way in that event, I hadn't fully understood. I thought at times the Russians were lying to me when they were actually telling me what they really thought, because I couldn't see it the way they were looking at it. It was a cultural difference, right? The potential for misunderstanding with China is vastly greater than it ever was, just because our cultures are so much more different. So that's a partnership that we have to worry about. We have to try to manage it. It's not as formidable as it could be, so we want to try and not make it any closer. But right now, there are to a certain degree separate problems that we're trying to manage. Sorry, I went off all over the place on that question, but it was a good question. It's an important part of the environment we're in.
Good morning, sir. Ned Sandlin, Air Force veteran and member of Red Arts Capital. Any thoughts on using private equity or engaging private equity to shore up A&D supply chains? I know you have some experience with your time at Renaissance.
We were doing more VC than private equity, but one of my partners is doing that. Renaissance is a company I was involved in as a partner before I came in. That's come up before, and we have set up a capital market, so to speak. The Secretary of Defense announced this at Reagan Forum a year or so ago, and Heidi Shue, the Undersecretary for Research and Engineering, is basically the lead on that. The problem I see with it is that private equity, like all investment accounts, is looking for a return. And the question is, okay, where are they going to get their return? It's true that there's a large amount of capital out there, and it's true that it could be invested in things to support the military. The question is, where does it go in a way which is going to give those investors the return they want on that investment, and at the same time benefit the federal government? I'll give you an example of the kind of thing that could be done. We could lease airplanes instead of buying them. So somebody else could use their capital, buy the airplanes, have them available for us, and then we would lease them. So we wouldn't put in that big upfront cost to buy them ourselves. The way we do, there are a couple things that work against that. One is that those platforms are things we might want to take into a conflict and lose a lot of. So then we've got this asset that we now still have to pay for. You have to look at the economics of that, and generally because the investors are trying to make money, it may not be a better deal for the government than just simply go out and buy the airplanes in the first place. And we're hampered on the cash flow basis a little bit by the rules by which we spend money like that. OMB, Office of Management and Budget, and the Congressional Budget Office would require us to score those things as if we had bought the property. So it's not clear to me that there's an obvious way to tap into that capital to get to a win-win for the government and for the investors. I'm open to ideas, though. I mean, if people can come and show us, here's the kind of deal we would have in mind, and here's how it would benefit everybody, we ought to be open to that. We ought to be open to new ideas and ways of doing business. So I think that's one of the things that's intended with that capital market that the Secretary of Defense's office has set up. And that's where I am on that right now. It's as far as I've gotten in terms of my thinking on that.
Good morning, sir. Lorenzo Marandola from M1 Composites Technology. Question. In 2021, China exported $2.8 trillion to the United States. And the United States exported $1.8 trillion to China. Why would you want to mess with that strong economy? Why would you want to engage in a war when there's so much at stake? Thank you.
You're 100% right, and I hope Xi Jinping understands that. We have done some things. My former deputy, when I was Undersecretary for Acquisition, is now over at the Commerce Department as the Undersecretary for BIS, the acronym which I can't recall, but it's basically export control provisions. And he's helped put in place a number of constraints on the things that we can sell to China. China's doing a bunch of things in the marketplace that are unprincipled, intellectual property theft in particular, using their leverage to basically extract technology from firms they do business with in order to create more for their own economy. So some of their practices that they're undertaking, we're trying to counter. But I think it's recognized that trade, that large volume of trade that you mentioned, at the end of the day benefits all of us. I'm a kind of a classic economist in terms of my orientation on that. I'm a believer in free trade. I think the theory is very clear, but the problem is it doesn't work unless everybody involved in it plays by the same set of rules. And we've helped, particularly again since World War II with the U.S., to establish a set of rules by which people can do business, which work out well, respect each other's rights, have ways to resolve differences and so on through either arbitration or courts and so on. So if China plays by those rules and engages in commerce, in conformity with that, now they think that that's a system that's rigged against them. I don't think it is. I think it's a system that's designed to be fair and be a win-win for everybody involved. And I think the results over the last several decades of growth in the world's economy reflect that. So that's where we are on that. I don't want a war with China. Nobody should want a war with China. For a whole bunch of very good reasons.
We have another question back here, sir.
Thank you, Secretary Kendall. Nick Tevenigam here from Parts Life. I encourage you to see our booth downstairs if you can come. So we know China's anti-access aerial denial strategy. How do we kind of get back to creating that nimble web of logistics to kind of be prepared for this in the future coming with the ACE concept and things of that nature? Thank you, sir.
I think we have good ideas, but that we have a lot of work to do to make them into reality and to scale them up. Agile combat employment, the idea of operating from multiple bases is one of them. Logistics under attack, if you will. Contested logistics is another one. We just did a Corona, which is our name for some reason for the meeting of all the senior leadership of the Department of the Air Force that we have every 6 months or so. And half a day was spent at our last meeting this spring doing a tabletop exercise on contested logistics. It's one of the things that under one of the operational imperatives, I want to spend a lot more time on and put a lot more effort into. We have to look at the information systems we depend upon. We have to look at what needs to already be forward, how we use a combination of deception and other things. There's a lot of work to be done to really get us ready for what we might have to do. And I think we're still at early stages of that, but that's very much a part of the equation. The adversaries we have potentially are very thoughtful about how we operate and what our vulnerabilities might be. And they're not going to miss some obvious places where we're dependent that they could attack. We can't assume that. We don't want to make that assumption. It would be a fatally bad assumption to make.
Is there another question from the back?
Yes, sir. Richard Stevens with the 448 Supply Chain Management Wing at Tinker Air Force Base. So Russia and China are exporting influence in Africa and other countries that are less stable. And so wondering if what our Department of State and perhaps some of our other U.S. associations, USAID and others, and our military can do or are doing to help counter what Russia and China are hoping to do in the whole continent of Africa and other nations.
Yeah, Russia and China are both fairly active. China in particular, in the southern half of the planet, basically, South America and Africa and Central Asia as well. China has the Belt and Road Initiative. The good news is that China is not doing all that well with a lot of their attempts to basically use their financial clout and their influence to shape their relationships around the world. They turn out to be not very good partners. They tend to cut business deals which are not really to a win-win, not really to the advantage of the state doing them, puts them in a position of heavy debt. They often bring in their own people to do the work instead of using locals. So while they are having some degree of success and they are being fairly aggressive, they're also having some significant setbacks and not achieving what they would try to do. But we can't be complacent about that. A lot of that is not military per se. It's about where we invest, how we encourage investment overseas, and what we do through a number of international forums. The U.S.'s greatest strategic advantage is its friends and partners around the world, its allies and partners, and we need to work through them. If you haven't read it, take a look at the National Security Strategy. There's a National Security Strategy the White House puts out. There's a National Defense Strategy that Secretary Austin puts out for the Department of Defense. And the Defense Department is all about, being able to deter through strength, essentially, and the things that contribute to that. The White House has a paragraph on defense in this whole volume, basically. The rest of it is all about economic competition and about how we need to secure our economic well-being. And one of the things that this administration has done, I think, very successfully is to rebuild a lot of our relationships around the world. We had a little bit of help unintended from Vladimir Putin. He thought he was going to divide NATO, and he got a much more united NATO than he started out with. He also got an expanded NATO, and Finland in already and Sweden soon to be. And a NATO that has woken up to the fact that it has a threat in the East that it has to deal with and be prepared for. So we're seeing alliances generally strengthen. I've been in the Pacific recently. Congressman mentioned his trips and what he's been seeing. There was a widespread recognition, and it's increased significantly over the last decade and a half that I've been making trips to the Pacific, where countries like the Philippines, we just opened some additional basing opportunities in the Philippines. Secretary Austin did that. Japan's being more open about some of the types of cooperation we're going to have with Japan. The Australians, we just did a big exercise with them. We're expanding some of the Air Force's presence there. We don't have permanent bases there. They don't allow that, but we have a great deal of cooperation. We do a lot of exercises together, and we do a lot of rotational things with them, and that's expanding. India, I was just in India. Their relationship with the U.S. is getting closer over time. They have a border conflict with China that's ongoing, a historical relationship with Russia that is starting to drift more towards the U.S. as we particularly open up opportunities for them. We just did a deal with India on jet engine technology, which had been working for a long time. And I worked the Defense Trade and Technology Initiative with India, my previous job. That relationship is growing. And a lot of this is driven by a growing awareness of the threat that China poses to the order, if you will, that we currently enjoy and all benefit from in the world.
Sir, we have time for one last question.
I've got a big red light down here now.
Good morning, sir. I'm Paul Redette with Supply Chain here at Tinker. What's being done at the highest level for us at the low level to obtain the obsolete or hard to obtain parts for the aging air fleet that we have to support every day?
Yeah, Joe Hawkins and I were talking about that on the way here. I made a trip out here for a study I was doing for the National Academies a few years ago. And I saw at Tinker where we're using additive manufacturing to fabricate parts that were built 50 years ago, maybe, that nobody thought would ever wear out. Nobody thought we were going to fly those airplanes for 50 years. And we're trying to bring in new technology to address some of those things. We're, I think, as we were talking, trying to very actively and aggressively work the supply chain. And I saw this when I was in industry too, when I was major defense contractors. The primes, and this is largely a meeting of primes, have a responsibility, and I know what the primes do already. I've worked with a number of you to manage your supply chains, that you're not passive about that. There are new tools that allow you to kind of understand your supply chains better that I think you're using. The government needs to adopt some of those tools as well, and I think we need to be partners in this. But there is a big role for the primes in this, but there's also a big role for the government. And where we're doing in-house logistics support and depot work, for example, we're going to need to manage our own supply chain, which is pretty extensive. You know, COVID did a lot of damage. We were talking about how some of that damage has still not quite been repaired. I think we lost some of our small businesses in particular. So we got to pay a lot of attention to that. We got to actually put resources against it and manage it actively and continuously. And one of the things we talked about this morning was that we need to change some of our internal processes so we can be more efficient. And the way we have structured airworthiness, for example, in the Air Force on an aircraft-by-aircraft basis isn't necessarily the best way to evaluate a new technology that can provide parts across all those different aircraft. So we've got some work to do on our side. And as General Hawkins said, that's the thing that keeps him up at night more than anything else, right? I think it's keeping a lot of us up at night, and we're just going to have to pay constant attention to it and intervene when it's the right thing for the government to do. We have some tools we can use. One thing I would ask you to do, whether you're a sub or a prime or whatever your role is, don't be silent about problems that you're dealing with. You know, come to the government and talk to us, and I think this will resonate, and we'll work with you to try to solve these problems. It's in all of our interest to get them addressed. Okay, I think that was my last one, I guess. I am now officially got the hook, right? All right. Thank you very much. I enjoyed being with you. Enjoy the rest of the conference. It's a great lineup. Thank you for your support for our military. It's enormously valued. All kidding aside, I know this is a hugely patriotic community. I get a lot of feedback to that regard. I'm not going to try to compare our other communities with you, one with the other one, but your support for our airmen and our guardians is deeply, deeply appreciated. We are going to be in a time of challenge for the foreseeable future, probably for all of our lifetimes. And your support is going to be invaluable as we meet those challenges. So thank you very much. Thanks for being with me.
Please take your seats and buckle up. Our program will begin in just 5 minutes. Distinguished guests and attendees, please take your seats. This year's Tinker and the Primes will begin in just a moment. Distinguished guests and attendees, please take your seats. This year's Tinker and the Primes will begin in just a moment. Please welcome back to the stage today's MC, Senator Brenda Stanley.
Thank you all. We would like to extend our thanks again to Secretary Kendall for being in our great state of Oklahoma today. We're thankful for the steadfast leadership and path he continues to pave on behalf of the United States Air Force. Our next speaker is headquartered at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Ohio. He oversees 89,000 people employed within his command, managing $72 billion of the budget authority annually. Please welcome Commander of the Life Cycle Management Center, General Duke Richardson.
Okay, take your seats. All right, so I guess I need to make a correction. General Morris is giving me these funny looks, like, so truth be told, actually, you know, that actually is an interesting comment that the senator just made, because in many ways, I do feel like Air Force Materiel Command, which is, you know, the command that I'm the commander of, really is misnamed. Sometimes I think it should be called the Air Force Life Cycle Management Command. And so that's a whole nother probably talk that I could give. But and the reason I say that is because when you look at the work that Air Force Materiel Command does across all 6 centers, it really is life cycle management of all of our weapon systems and our installations. We do actually have one of our centers, one of our 6 centers is called the Air Force Life Cycle Management Center. So that is a little bit confusing, but thank you, Senator, for saying that, because really that is going to be one of my messages here, is that everybody in this room is doing life cycle management every day, regardless of which center or industry or organization that you're from. So let me just start by thanking you. I was here last year, I think right after I became the commander. I got a chance to talk. I gave you some initial thoughts. Since that time, we published a strategic plan in January. We've been, rotely following it, I'll say. It's pretty simple. It's only, I think 6 or 9 pages. It kind of really serves as a framework. I'm not going to talk about that today, but I gave you glimpses into it last year, and really, we're pretty much following it. We actually ended up codifying what we discussed last year at this forum, but this year I'm going to focus on a different topic that's an initiative underneath the strategic plan. So we'll just kind of winnow down a little bit. Secretary Kendall, that's tough to follow. We were at a very strategic, I thought I was at a strategic level. I don't think I am now. I mean, we're at the internationally strategic level in those conversations that we just had with him. And so we'll kind of winnow down a little bit and get into a little bit more material kind of stuff. So General Hawkins, thanks for inviting me. Great forum. I think we have 800. It seems like it's getting bigger all the time. Really a terrific forum. I looked at your lineup. Wow, is that your personality that scored all these great people coming here? I think I counted like 10, like, wow, Jen Hammerstedt's here. This is really great. You got General Morris. I mean, where's General Miller? Did he leave? Yeah, you really got a line. I feel like, I don't know. I'll try not to disappoint. So, it's really great to be here representing the 89,000 uniformed and civilian airmen that comprise Air Force Materiel Command. It's really great to be here with industry partners and also academia. I know there's a lot of academia in here, and I'll talk about a little bit about that today because, frankly, without the product that you build in those educational institutions, we would never be able to do what we do at any of our bases. Like Secretary Kendall, I'm not going to say that Tinker's my favorite, but I really do love coming here. In fact, I think if I counted out the number of days, I think I've spent more time here, after Wright-Patterson, which is, I've never asked the Air Force to go anywhere, but for some reason they keep sending me there. But aside from Wright-Patterson, I've been more TDY days here at Tinker than any other location. So love it here, love the hospitality, and I love the work and the work ethic that goes on here. So what I want to kind of start with is this, really where Secretary Kendall left off, and that's the People's Republic of China. Their ability to field weapon systems is by far surpassing ours. At first I got, as an American, got a little fussy about that. I'm like, yeah, but did they work as well? Well, it turns out they work pretty well. And so, okay, then we need to probably do something about that. And just as a statistic, and this isn't mine, this comes from the the GAO, the General Accountability Office, or excuse me, the Government Accountability Office, they on average take 7 years to deliver a major weapon system, to field a major weapon system, and it takes us right now about 16. And that's starkly different. And so we've noticed that. This is an unclassified forum, but if you get into classified sessions, you'll see the stuff that they're delivering, the capabilities that they're delivering, and then you'll see the rate at which they're delivering them, and it's pretty darn concerning. So what that's manifested inside the building, at the Pentagon, and also I think at every AFMC location, is just this palpable sense of urgency. Whereas, probably I'd say the 2000s. I think when I think about the 2000s, I think about this push for efficiency. You remember better buying power, every dollar counts, all that stuff. Really, we have geared ourselves to be extremely efficient. And now we're coming out of that. And so I don't hear a lot of people saying that anymore. Obviously, we don't need to be reckless with money because we have taxpayer concerns as well. Plus, the more efficient we are, the more stuff that we can do. But I think there's more of a balance now in the need to be efficient, but also try to go much faster. And that's a little bit of what I want to talk about today. I'm struck by a book. I don't know, I got here late because we had some weather coming in, but Secretary Kendall did he talk about this book, Recoding America? No? So he sort of directed all of us to read this book called Recoding America by Jennifer Polka. And so, and it's $33, by the way. There's not a there's not a soft version. So you're going to have to either get it electronically or pay the $33, which of course I did. And so I'm working my way through that book right now, as many of us are. It's pretty good. And I'll talk a little bit about that book because it is affecting how we're trying to attack some of the stuff that I want to talk about today. But there's a quote in there about we can't deliver yesterday's technology tomorrow, which is certainly true. Other parts of that book that resonate pretty well, 3 points in the book. One is this idea of we need to be agile. We need to be agile organizations. We need to be learning organizations versus what she calls waterfall. And the way she describes waterfall is this idea of, hey, we write policy, and then we turn that policy into process, and then we demand compliance, right? That's kind of what we do, And heck, I do that sometimes. And so her point being is that's not an agile way to do it. And so she gives lots of examples of failed government IT systems that, some smart policymaker, said, here's the policy. Some smart process maker said, here's how we're going to implement that. And then they didn't mind the details of how it was actually implemented. And then they demanded compliance to some, tool that was not very effective. There's lots of examples out there that I won't cite, but you probably know which ones they are. Another large point of the book is that shorter plans are better than long detailed plans. It really is an outgrowth of the first one. And so for me, the way we manifest that is this idea of mission type order. So you'll see the Air Force is really pushing this idea of mission type orders. And if you've ever read one, and I'm starting to see them, so they're cropping up. General Hawkins is writing them. I mean, it's like becoming a thing. It's like really popular to write these mission type orders. And there's a section in there about commander's intent, where you kind of give what outcomes you expect, but you don't prescribe exactly how it should be done. They're not short, so they're probably they say a page and a half. So it's not like it's 4 sentences, but it's not overly detailed either. And I think that also speaks to what Jennifer Polka is trying to talk about. So we need room. Don't prescribe so much order that we can't learn along the way. And so this idea of writing those mission type orders, and that'll come in later as I get onto this. And then the third point is this. This is an interesting point. Implementation is just as important as the policy. How you implement the policy is just as important as the policy. And so for me, that manifests into how we implement change in AFMC is as important as the goals of that change. And so I'm going to talk about some change in a little bit, and then at the very end, I'm going to talk about how we're trying to implement that change, because I think we realize that if we don't implement it correctly, we're going to do exactly what she started with. We're going to drive policy, we're going to dictate process. I'm going to hit, General Hawkins, General Morris are going to club people and saying you're going to comply, and it's not, and by the way, I don't actually work anymore. General Morris, General Hawkins, sorry, you guys probably don't work anymore either. So, you know, the folks in this room, the implementers, they're the ones that know whether the things that we're saying, hey, this is what you got to do, are actually good or not. So we have to very much listen to them. We have to be agile. There has to be a feedback loop. What that really means is that we got to involve more people than ourselves. And so when I think about this, I think about in AFMC, we have materials leaders, we have program executive officers, we have commanders, we have heavy maintenance complexes, we have supply chain wings, we've got the test center, we've got all these organizations, we've got the laboratory, we got the Department of the Air Force. And we have industry and we have academia. And if he didn't say this, I'll steal another line from him. This construct of one team, one fight that the Secretary talks about, we're really, really, really trying to implement that inside Air Force Materiel Command. We want to be super integrated. And so, with that, some of the things you'll see, this idea of continuous design reviews, just all kinds of collaboration that needs to go on, that I don't think is going on. We haven't done very well at that. And so, in addition to the speed delay, I guess, or the time delay that you're seeing, there's a lot of other things that have happened. So we have a lot of stovepipe solutions. Very often we build weapon systems just with the team that's working on it, and they sort of ignore what's going on around them in other weapon systems. We do that inside the government. I think industry does it. So I think if I went to an industry team, I often wonder how much sharing is actually occurring across some of the industry players. And so the ideas that I'm going to talk about are really, this idea of integration applies very much so across AFMC centers, but it also applies across programs. And so the Air Force is starting to kind of look at how we organize in terms of our PEO structure. The first one that you see, this Luke Cropsey, so PEO, basically the PEO responsible for building this battle network. If you look at his portfolio, he's really touching and trying to impact a lot of programs that he doesn't actually own. So he's General Morris will probably say, hey, he's not really our first, which is true, he's not really our first cross-cutter PEO. I would argue that our weapons PEO is a cross-cutter PEO. I would argue that John Sneeden, for all intents and purposes, is our propulsion PEO. So we have had these, but Luke really has brought it to the forefront because he's trying to connect a lot of electrons flying around. And so I think that won't be the last one. So we're looking at a future of, are there other sorts of PEO constructs, more cross-cutter PEOs, so we can drive more of that integration. We also need to figure out how to allow more entrance into the market. And so, we've got our primes, we love our primes, all that. We've got a very massive supply base. And so what I'm very interested in is how do we expand that supply base? Very, very interested in that so that we can get new entrants, novel suppliers in there. And I think we do that by making sure that we can preserve competition. So the benefits of competition are very real. We see that every day. And I think they occur at all levels, not just the prime level. I think they occur at the supplier level. And so that stovepipe approach, that non-integrated approach across our centers, across our vendor base, across other parts of the government, we got what we asked for. It's slow, it's inexpensive, it doesn't react well, it's not agile. And so we've got to do something about that. I think we've done decently in a couple areas. Two things I want to mention. So General Hawkins and General Morris have been working on this software directive. Have you all heard about that? Oh, he's laughing. Okay, I'm glad that you're laughing. That means that it's a real thing. I got on the scene. They started hitting me right away. I said, hey, man, slow your roll, And I did. I'm like, wait, this is like a big change. And I think at first General Hawkins and General Morris thought that I was trying to be a bureaucrat. Like, hey, okay, you're the new commander's the Department of No. And so then, and I sensed it. I could see in their face. I said, hey, I think this is a great idea. In fact, I think it's such a great idea that let's make sure that this is all laying flat before we roll it out. And so I think it was January. We ended up rolling it out 4 or 5 months later, but I think we got to a much better spot, at least from my perspective on it. And so that's a huge win. So basically taking the 3 software engineering groups, one at Hill, Robs, and Tinker that are really essentially aligned to the complexes that do heavy maintenance. They do very different work. And then pulling those together. Is Mike Jennings here? No? Pulling them together. He's right, you can't see a thing with those lights. Pulling them together in this thing that we're calling a software directorate. And really that's just the first, I would say the largest step at the same time. I think one thing that General Hawkins is reminding me is, you know, the Air Force Sustainment Center does most of the software work, organic software work. And he gave me stats, and I'm like, wow, I didn't realize that. And so that first step that we took is actually, I would say, the biggest. Now, it may not be the hardest, though. The hardest step is yet to come, and we want to kind of expand that under the leadership of General Hawkins and General Morris to start looking at this affiliate construct where we can start making other software factories that aren't in the Sustainment Center follow some of the same methods, processes, digital methods. And so that's the next step. That'll take a little bit more time to unfold. But I consider that a huge win in our journey to figure out how we can be more agile and go faster. Another one, the second one I would give you is, and this happened a few years ago, the Open Architecture Management Office, which is under General Morris's command, you know, in terms of coming up with open standards, the Open Mission System Standard, the UCI Standard for Communication Protocols. That work was started a number of years ago, almost like a front runner to a lot of the digital work that you're hearing. So that's under General Morris's command. I also consider that a win, but we need to now take that and build on it. That work got started under the Rapid Capabilities Office a number of years ago. We transferred it to Lifecycle Management Center so that we could scale it up to more programs than just the ones that are in the Rapid Capabilities Office. That's another win. I'll tell you, I guess the third win that I would add is, and this really is getting me about to where the thing that I want. It's called DMM. Anybody heard of it? Yes? Raise your hand if you've heard of that. Digital Material Management. Okay. All right. Some, not as much as I was hoping for, actually. So I'm going to put a shameless plug in for a white paper at the very end of this, at the end of this talk. But if you look at what some of our, I would say, our newer programs are doing, and I'm thinking about next generation air dominance, I'm thinking about B-21, I'm thinking about Sentinel and some of the newer weapons programs, and also some of the work that General Cropsey's doing with ABMS. They're very much embracing digital material management, and I'll kind of describe what I mean by that in a minute. They're very, very much embracing it, and so really, they're the pathfinders. They're slightly doing it differently here and there, and so it's just kind of like, you know, when you go to a college and you got to decide where to put the sidewalks at a brand new college. You don't actually build the sidewalks. You just let the students go to class for a semester or two, and then where you see the dirt strips, that's where you lay the sidewalk down. And so we're trying to do that a little bit here in terms of letting those pathfinders kind of figure it out. Really, really smart people working on that. General Morris has put, I would say, his wolves out there to figure out how to do that. And so we're watching them closely, and they've done a lot of this already, and so I know that this works. And so what I want to talk about now is this idea called digital material management. Where we take what's gone on in NGAD, B-21, Sentinel, to varying degrees, and we try to see if we can scale it and turn it into what we call an enterprise solution. But we do it in such a way that we don't violate some of the stuff that Jennifer Polka talks about in her Recoding America book. And so what's happened in the world really is a couple of profound things. The first thing is compute power is so much greater now than it was even a decade ago. And people are like, well, we've had computers forever. Yes, that's true. Believe it or not, I know I'm old, but I actually did use a computer when I went to college. I did, Jeff, come on. So that's true, I used one, but the compute power now is completely different. I mean, just even in our phones, but in our desktop computers, the compute power is just tremendous. The next one is the cloud. And so now we have access to the cloud, right? So we have cloud tools. I use it for my home use. I use it at work pretty extensively. It's wonderful. If you haven't started using it yet, you might look at it in all areas. And so the cloud has really changed it. It changed the ability to work together with other government teams, but also with the industry teams, and not work necessarily at the same location. And so that's a big change. And really the third change is is really just a, spawning off the first two, and that's the access to new tools. So because of the compute power and because of the cloud, we now have access to a whole new set of tools that allow us to do this thing called digital material management. It's very clear that you can't see that. There is actually a white paper that we've published. It's 6 or 7 pages that I would encourage you to read. I'll say it's a 10-minute read tops, where it talks about these principles. And I just want to walk through the initiatives under DMM a little bit. The first one is modernizing IT infrastructure. And so what we've found is that our IT infrastructure isn't where it needs to be. So those Pathfinder programs have all set up these integrated digital environments, IDEs. And in the best cases, they're linked in with their vendor counterparts. But we need those integrated digital environments are not where they need to be. And so we're struggling a little bit with that. Most specifically in terms of classified environments. So we need the ability to have an unclassified version of it, a collateral secret version, a TS version, and then even a special access program version. And what we really need is the ability to transcend those layers without a thought. And we're not there yet. There's ways of doing it. We're figuring it out. They're not super elegant, and so there's a lot of time and effort put into that. Outside of that gear, it says modernize IT infrastructure, because without that, this doesn't work. And so a lot of effort going on there, and I'll tell you a little bit later how we're going to get after that. The next one is instilling a digital-first culture. And so, a lot of workforce that wasn't raised using these techniques, their first thought is take the process they already have and just digitize it. And that's not exactly at all what we're after. We want to actually completely write a new process. We believe that's transformation. So we want to start by instilling a digital-first culture in the workforce. Lots of ways that comes in play. I'll mention two very quickly: how we do design reviews and how we get data delivered to us. And I'll mention those a little bit more later. The next one is develop digital strategies. And so we want to work with all the centers to come up with digital strategies for their portion of life cycle management. Remember when I said all of AFMC does life cycle management? The test center does it. They do the test part of it. The sustainment center does it. They do the heavy maintenance and the supply support part of the life cycle. So making sure that each center and then each organization within the centers are using or moving towards digital strategies. We recognize that some of our legacy programs, that's a big lift, so we do realize that there's a return on investment calculation that has to happen to see whether it's worth going. I'll tell you though, when I hear that though, the first thing I think about is the A10. So we don't have an OEM for an A10 anymore. The government's the OEM. And so we had to recreate a lot of things from the A10. And I don't know, is anybody here from Hill that works at A10? They just gave me a tremendous briefing a couple of weeks ago about the work they've done to go digital on A10. I was blown away by it. And so they had to do it out of necessity. So think about that. A team had to do it out of necessity, felt the ROI was there for a platform that they know that we're going to divest. And so if you're out there and you've got a legacy system, think about ways for going digital. Fourth one is structure and secure our data. That's a big one. So we have this tool called Air Force PLM, Product Lifecycle Management. The tool that we chose is the vendor name is Team Center. And so that's our tool of choice for housing a lot of our data that all of the centers will use. So that's our method for structuring and securing our data. But this idea of data, being able to, trust it, making sure that it's authoritative, single source, right? First rule of databases, there's only one database. Accessible so that you can get to it where you need it. Make sure it's current. All those things that govern data. Make sure it's secure, make sure it's marked properly so that the IP that's the government is marked accordingly. The IPs that the vendor is also marked accordingly. The next one is tools. Having access to tools, making sure the workforce has access to tools. And I'm talking about all kinds of tools. So I mentioned one tool already called Team Center for housing a lot of the data, but I'm also talking about design tools. I'm talking about modeling tools for performance because those are effectively design tools as well. I'm talking about Cameo for doing systems engineering, traceability. All of those things that we need. One area that I think we're short on tools is the tools don't seem to talk well to each other. And I think that's an area that we need to fix. So if I'm doing, like in my perfect world, if I'm doing a 3D design of an outer mold line in an airplane, I want to pivot to this other screen and see how that just affected the performance. I don't want to have to fat finger the changes into the performance tool. And I think this should be possible. So as Cody Karen, my aide-de-camp, mentioned to me on the airplane today, yes, sir, this application programming interfaces, APIs, have been around since 2002. The internet has figured this out. We should be able to figure out a way to pass information, to call for information and pass it between these tools, even if they're made by different vendors. And so we've got to get to there. That's kind of probably the holy grail. But for now, I'll just start with making sure that we have access to the tools. Long term, we need to be able to get the tools to talk to them, to integrate the tools themselves. And then the final one is training the digital workforce. And so there's a lot of effort there. General Morris and General Hawkins and the other center commanders are very, very involved in making sure that the workforce is trained in these new techniques. And so there's a lot of work to go. Part of that is, trying to decide, hey, are there tools that we should mandate? And so we're working through that right now. We don't think so. We think the only tool we should mandate is Team Center. I would be interested in knowing what tools the industry partners mandate. I did a couple of years ago. I did a sort of an audit on tools, and it looks like there are a lot of tools that are used even within the same company. A lot of the tools aren't standardized, and so trying to figure out, is there a reason for that? Is there really a reason for that difference there, or is it just out of convenience or personality driven? So those are the 6, I call them levers. If Colonel Quigley were here, he would call them initiatives. So those are the 6 things that are represented. If you read that white paper, it'll go through that. That white paper also does a really good job of describing digital material. Notice it doesn't say digital acquisition, and it doesn't say digital engineering. Can you please notice that? It says material management. And it's really supposed to touch on all the work that every one of our centers does, all 6 of them. And so I want to just walk through this very quickly. I want to make sure I leave time for questions through 2 perspectives. The first perspective, and if you read the white paper, there's 2 perspectives. When you think about digital material management, think about it through 2 lenses. The first lens is the life cycle lens. And so if you think about invention, these tools will help us with invention. They'll actually do a lot in terms of capability development. In other words, driving what requirements we should be going after. So the material AFMC community is very much part of the requirements community as well, in my opinion. A lot of people don't like to hear that, but the reality is that we're not going to sign up to deliver something that's not possible or that's going to be super expensive. And so there's a relationship there between operator, acquirer, technologist, and so that starts right at invention. And a lot of these tools, these performance modeling tools, will allow us to sort of design things and try things out, through digital means. The next one is systems engineering and requirements decomposition. This is certainly very much in General Morris's wheelhouse and General Newberry's wheelhouse at the Nuke Weapons Center. The secretary, when he first heard about this, said, hey, there's nothing new here, it's systems engineering. Yes, sir, you're exactly right, there's nothing new here, it's systems engineering, but it's how we're doing it that's different. And so these tools that I've been mentioning are really, really good at doing systems engineering. In fact, I would say they're way better because they avoid us making mistakes in terms of how requirements are flowed down and then how requirements are tested on the way back up the right side of the V. Which leads me to testing. So there's a lot of testing that we would like to move into the virtual realm. If you think about it, I would love to be able to move more flight tests into ground tests, more ground tests into lab tests, and then more lab tests into a digital verification. The key to that is making sure that our models are good. And so I don't know if there's any testers in here. If General Durteen was here, he'd say, hey, I'm totally on board, but we have to spend time up front making sure the models are actually accredited before we start checking off test points. And I'm in agreement with that. I do think there's a lot of value in the testing realm. Production, huge value in production. If you can imagine being able to make parts, the same part at multiple suppliers, because you've sent the digital package to that supplier and they have the machining equipment to make it the way that you've instructed it to be made, to the tolerance that you've said, such that they're not trying to, maybe leave more material there so they can do scrap and rework in case so they don't have to scrap a whole part. This is proven out on a couple of programs to where we can bring parts from one tail and move them over to another tail and they fit. So it allows us to bring pre-drilled parts to the production floor, and suddenly it takes production totally off the critical path. I mean, we have the ability to make parts that come in pre-drilled and pre-stuffed. And then even somebody like me could go in there and actually put two parts together. And it doesn't actually look that hard. Sorry, Lockheed, Boeing, Northrop, Raytheon. Sorry, but if we can get to that point where a lot of the supply base is doing a lot of that work, that production work, all we're really doing at the higher levels is kind of snapping it together. And this is possible. This isn't folly. Huge benefit in production, huge benefit in sustainment. Think about the PLM tool that I mentioned. Being able to, when we get into these, so General Hawkins, is tired of hearing me talking about, we have a lot of supply issues right now, and I think I saw a couple talks on this during this conference. I know you're going to be taking that head on, but I think there's a lot of benefit and potential in the supply support area in here, and also the heavy maintenance area as well. And so we're working pretty closely with General Hawkins on that. A lot of it has to do with making sure that we can secure the data and make sure that it's accessible. And then if General Allen was here, he'd also say, hey, by the way, we're rebuilding Tyndall using digital methods as well. So it even affects installation and mission support. So this idea of DMM, none of the centers are going to escape it. They know that. Not as long as I'm here. None of the centers are going to escape it. We're applying these methods across all 6 centers. I don't think the vendor base can escape it. In fact, some of the vendors that I'm talking to, I would say initially, maybe a year ago, they were behind us in terms of their thoughts, and more recently, I feel like the government's behind. I do. I feel like the government's getting behind. So maybe I'm speaking more to the government team out there than the industry team, because the industry is making investments here, large investments. And they're moving out. Okay, so the second way to look at it is through a functional perspective. And so if you're a program manager, think about Major Karen and I were talking about how we do schedule risk assessments, which I won't bore you on. But when you think about schedule risk assessments, that concept, baseline control, all the tools that a program manager uses, risk assessments, very much play in the digital realm. When you think about contracting, there's another one. So the contracting community, are there any contracting folks out there? I just need to know who I'm offending. So they're very quick to think, oh no, this doesn't apply to us. We've already got the FAR, it's all saucered and blown. We have our, you know what DIDs are, data item descriptors, how we ask for data deliverables. Those are all done. We know what we're doing here. Oh no, you don't. No, all the DIDs need to be thrown away. So the way that we get data from industry has to change. And so there's a very large contractual aspect to all of this. And so they're very much part of this, very, very much part of it. The clauses that we put into the contracts have to change. How we handle intellectual property has to change. How we incentivize industry has to change. How we work with DCMA has to change. So please don't tell me that contracting doesn't have a role here. This is not just about engineering. It is a large role in engineering, so I'm just going to probably just skip over that one because that one is pretty obvious, I think. Logistics. So we talked about the supply aspects of it, the PLM. If Miss Estep was here, and she does this every time I talk about this topic, she would hammer me upside the head and say, the real payoff is in logistics and sustainment and supply support. And she's right. And so that's why we did mandate the PLM tool. So there's a whole lot of effort going on in the logistics area. Even the log IT programs fold in here, so it's not just PLM Team Center. So we're doing a bunch of work in how we do supply support, the MROI, sorry Jeff, I still call it that. The MRI tool that we use that's going to eventually be at all 3 complexes is also part of that effort. The ability, hopefully once we have the data that we need, we can actually deal with vanishing DMS issues and folks that simply won't, where's Steve Gray? Steve, if you tell me one more time hey, we can't get the part because we couldn't get anybody to bid on it, I'm going to lose my mind. Okay? That should not happen. And so part of that, I think, is going to help us get after that. We should never be in a situation where we can't get somebody to go bid on a part. That's a longer discussion. We have a whole supply sprint that's going to be attacking that, but I think digital is going to help us there as well. Financial management, I mentioned the schedule risk assessment. Usually schedule risk assessments end up in some kind of a estimate at complete update. I think there's how we do cost estimates. Right now they're in a kind of a wait and see mode. They want to kind of see that this is real before they change how they do cost estimates. But certainly how we do budget management, there's a large role there. And I mentioned test and evaluation as well. So I kind of cut it through two methods. I cut it through a life cycle approach, and I also cut it through a functional approach. That means that everybody in this room, and I know I didn't cover all the functionals, I'm sorry, intelligence, security, go through them all. You all are not escaping. Nobody in this room is escaping. If you're in academia, you're in industry, nobody gets to escape from this. And so we talked about this a little bit a year ago. I'm talking about it more. It's in the strategic plan. When I talk about enterprise solutions, it is probably the enterprise solution of the enterprise solutions. This is the really big idea that we're trying to do in Air Force Materiel Command. Also, it's got pretty good, it's catching on inside the building with Secretary Kendall as well. And so that's why I want to transition to we stood up this thing called a DATF, D-A-T-F, Digital Acceleration Task Force. Like all task forces, it won't stay around forever. It'll exist for 2 to 3 years. Brigadier General Select Eric Quigley, write his name down if you want, rather than calling me. Quigley is I like to call him the commander, although he'll say, well, sir, I'm not really a commander. Okay, the DATF director. But from my perspective, he's got the stick on this. And so he's formed a team. It includes folks from the headquarters. It includes folks from every center. And a lot of them are full-time. And so that was one of the things we said is we got to make this a full-time job for a subset of the task force. There's other task force members that are not full-time, but they're also part of the task force. And so the center commanders are letting them know this is an important thing for you to do. This is not a side hustle. And so what they're getting after, they're writing 4 mission type orders that I will sign out. One of them is on, the first one is on, by the way, they had their kickoff on the 17th of July, so this is underway. One of them is on structuring and securing our data using a digital consortium. So we're going to try to, if you're out there, we're going to create an industry consortium. Not everybody's going to be able to be part of it. I apologize for that. It's not that kind of a consortium. We want to make sure we get good representation so that when we come out with standards that, they're not something that a single vendor cooked up or the government cooked up. The implementers, back to the book, the implementers got a chance to kick into their thoughts. Second one is we're going to deliver a playbook, and really it's a digital guide that will affect all 6 centers. The third mission type order will be getting after, you remember where I said infrastructure is like the big one that I'm most worried about. So we're going to have a mission type order on getting after integrated digital environment that can be scaled so that it's not just a single program can use it. So that's the third one. The fourth one is securing our data and getting access to the data and writing standards. Those are sort of overlapping because that fourth one will definitely require the consortium. So when you see the Digital Acceleration Task Force, if you hear that term DATF or you hear Colonel Eric Quigley, he's really trying to supercharge DMM. We're not trying to eat the entire elephant. We're going to start with those 4 mission type orders and see where that gets us. And so in closing, great opportunity to talk about DMM with you, digital material management. Please read the white paper. Please get with Colonel Quigley in the DATF. I love, Stacy, I love the title of your conference, Proactive Sustainment. I think this is it. This is how we get proactive and get out of this reactionary, B-52 parts are not supportable, crisis. Sorry if you're out there and you love the B-52, that's just one example. But I think that's how we get after it. I think that's how we get after delays in F-16 SLEP. Because it turns out all F-16s aren't the same. Did you know that? F-16s in the same block aren't even, in the same lot aren't even the same. So we've got to get proactive on this. And so I think this is our secret weapon for doing that. And I think hopefully I've made the case that this really does apply to not just Air Force Materiel Command. I would argue that it applies to all of us, industry, academia, people that do requirements generation, everybody. And so I will stop there and see what questions you might have.
Sir, it looks like we have time for a couple questions, and the first one is coming to you via our conference app, and it is, sir, how does the command balance demands of modernization and sustainment?
I wonder if that's ill-found, you can't separate them. In my mind, I don't separate the two. So, but we do struggle with that a little bit. So one of the things that General Morris, did you already talk to him? So maybe you mentioned this a little bit. So the operational imperatives, that's kind of what you're talking about right there. So we have all these new programs coming at us, and so, in General Morris's case, this doesn't affect the nuke weapon center as much as General Morris, not nearly as much. He's trying to figure out how does he staff up, train, organize, train, equip the new program offices, but he's still got the A-10 program office. And so, how does he balance that? And so we're going through he's got a pretty good system for doing that in terms of, reallocating. We'll take more risk in legacy programs. We'll move folks over to the newer programs. We'll tend to move folks to the newer programs that are more skilled in these methods that I'm talking about. So we take risk in the legacy programs in two ways. They won't have as many people, and they probably won't be trained in digital methods. And so that's one of the things we do. But the fact is, we really can't trade one off for the other very well, honestly, because aircraft availability. We just had a global strike review with General Bussier where we went through all of his platforms, and he loves all the OI stuff, but I'm telling you right now, he's very, very worried about aircraft availability. And so, we'll do the same thing with Air Combat Command. We'll do that with all the MAJCOMs. And so the truth is we really can't, there's no easy day here. We've got to be able to do both. And that's the way that I attack it. General Morris definitely balances it, but I think the rest of us, we just have to be able to do them both. I'm hoping some of these tools will allow us to get to a world where we don't talk about them like they're two separate things. Okay?
Thank you, sir.
What else?
Got another question on the app here, and sir, it is, General, given your vast experience in life cycle management, what areas do you think we should be focusing on to increase today's readiness levels?
Wow. So I mentioned the strategic plan, and it's available. Anybody can read the strategic plan, and it's really simple, at least in my opinion. 4 lines of effort, and then there's objectives under each line of effort. The first line of effort is deliver integrated capabilities, because we deliver a lot of stuff. So I'm not going to say airplanes, right? So AFMC delivers a lot, so capabilities is meant to sort of grab everything that we do. Integrated, I already talked about that. The fighters need to talk to the bombers, right? And deliver is why we exist. Underneath there is one about delivering the future force, which was your first question, but also sustaining the current force. And so in terms of sustaining the current force, General Hawkins is, I think you're the champion for that, I'm assuming. There's 2 aspects of that. So you're tracking deliver integrated capabilities is LOE 1. 1.2 is sustain the legacy force or current force. Under 1.2, he's got a whole host of initiatives that he's working on. He did get a little present from me, so he did get issued an initiative called supply support, and I don't think and I've already mentioned that, so I think we've got to get much better at doing supply support. And so Steve Gray, you and I have become very close friends, which won't go away, right? You're going to unfortunately have to live with that for a while. So we need to do better in supply support, and so we're going after that. Another thing that General Hawkins has gotten is heavy maintenance, how we do heavy maintenance. So we're trying to make sure, it used to be said that if you've been to one depot, you've been to one depot. And when we did the 5-center construct, I think we did a pretty good job I would say standardizing at I'll say tier 1, maybe tier 2. Stacy, we got to go further than that. So when yes, if you go to, Tinker, or and you go to Robbins, you'll hear the same language. You'll even see the same charts, same art of the possible. You'll see a lot of the same techniques. Once you start digging deeper, though, you start seeing differences. And in my mind, I immediately say, well, why is that different? Wait, that tool. And so I get dissonance in my brain constantly. And so I've charged him to get after that, to make sure that we figure out what's best of breed. I don't care what complex it comes from, and let's figure out how to propagate it. I think the log-AT work is going to help us do that immensely. So the MROI tool that I mentioned is going to help us do that immensely. By the way, that's only part of it, though. So a lot of our platforms are maintained through contractor logistics support. So we've got a lot of work to do there. So I know that's a very long question, but at least two, even those initiatives probably have sub-initiatives underneath them. So, but we're getting after it. Am I out of time?
That's all we have for questions, sir.
Okay, I'm sorry. I was told I was supposed to talk for 15. I think I talked for 39 minutes. I'm sorry about that. Hopefully that was useful. If I could leave you with one thing, what you do is just crucial to the nation. The Air Force and the Space Force, I believe, have a very large role in what happens in terms of what the People's Republic of China decides to do. As Secretary Kendall mentioned, nobody wants to, I don't, but I think the best way to deter is to make sure that if we were to go to war, we would win, right? We would all agree with that. To me, deterrence is our first play. That's the first card I'm playing. There's only one way to play it, and that is to make sure that we're ready. So if you hear us talking about being ready, it's not that we want to go to war. I don't. I just want to make sure that if we do, that we win, and that we bring everybody home. That's what we're really about. How do we win? How do we win quickly? How do we make it painful on the adversary? And we do that by making sure that we have material. AETC provides the people. AFMC provides the material. It's as simple as that. You put the two together, the other match comes in the Air Force, use it. And we want to make sure that they've got the very best equipment from an AFMC perspective that's not just capable, but it's affordable and available. I.e., it works when it's supposed to, and it's not broken all the time, and we have supply support and all the other things. So thank you. Appreciate your time today.
Wow. Thank you, General Richardson. You all, I was standing backstage. I'm kind of in awe. Mayor Dukes, look what we've got here. We had Congressman Cole, Secretary Kendall, General Richardson, and our own General Stacy Hawkins. As my young friends would say, Midwest City, we've got it going on here. Now we're going to take a networking break sponsored by Aero Turbine. Please be sure to visit the exhibitor booths located throughout the conference center. Please remember to take your belongings with you and be back at 11:30 for the next session. You don't want to miss it. Thank you all for being here, and I'll see you at 11:30.